The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Olympic sexual athlete Ryan Luis Rodriguez presiding. Your eyes for the Honorable Judge Rodriguez.
I didn't even catch that reference. Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of Clue versus Sleuth, 1972. Clue is a 1985 ensemble comedy about a group of dinner guests trying to find a murderer in their midst. Sleuth is a 1972 dark comedy film that follows the intellectual battle between a successful writer and his cunning younger rival. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, in civil cases like this, the counsel appointed to represent each film will present their case for why their client is the superior movie. And ultimately, the jury will render its verdict as to which is the better film. This decision will hereby stand in all rankings and listicles from now on until the end of time, ad infinitum. Mr. Jeremy Black, you are representing Clue. You may present your opening statement.
Well, good evening, Judge, and good evening, my distinguished colleagues. We've got here, as is normal and as listeners will be familiar with, two very good films. There is no doubt that both Sleuth and Clue are well worth seeing, and each of them have what I think is fair to say is a cult following, and each of them has impressed those people that have seen them. I want to argue, I suggested that we counterpoint these two films, and I was fortunate enough to be given the choice as to which one I would like to represent, and I chose, after some reflection, Clue, because as I hope to argue in my subsequent submission, while both films are good, I think Clue works better as a film.
Thank you, Jeremy. Appearing on behalf of Sleuth is Mr. Dylan J. Schlender. Please present your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. So today, as distinguished opposing counsel said, we're talking about two great mystery comedy movies. We've got Clue and we have Sleuth. But when it comes down to it, there really is only one film that deserves to be crowned the champion of this genre. And no, I don't mean Murder by Death. I am talking about Sleuth, the film I am representing today. Sleuth is a masterclass in storytelling. It is elegant. It has this wonderfully intricate dance between the two main characters who are absolutely pitch perfect in their performances. And when it came out in 72, mind you, because Clue would come out in 85, it set the bar. It elevated the mystery genre to new heights while also offering very interesting commentary on that genre and even some class distinctions in Britain at the time. So Clue is entertaining. It's fun, but it doesn't have that same depth of field that Sleuth does. So today I will implore you to judge not just on the surface level entertainment, but the true measure of a great film, the ability to captivate and challenge its audience like Sleuth does. It pushes the boundaries of what we expected, and it leaves an impression that we will never be able to ignore. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schlender. Mr. Black, you may proceed with your first exhibit.
Thank you. Before doing so, just a few comments on my worthy opponent's hyperbole.
Hyperbole? No, never.
I think that was all a little over the top, if he doesn't mind. But he did capture one point at the very outset, which I'd like to start with, that these are both intended as comedies. And what I would suggest to you is that Clue works better as a comic film, that Sleuth works better as the filming of a play with only limited comedy in it, and, spoiler alert, with one of the characters being murdered in a way that is not funny at all and that reveals the insanity of the other. So I don't agree with him that Sleuth is in fact a true comedy, and it's certainly not a true comedy film, it's a play. Now, in the case of Clue, there are obviously problems with Clue. At times, its zany energy will please some more than others, and as listeners may know, in profitability terms, it cost $15 million to make. In the American market, which was the one it was preponderantly shown in, it only made 14.7 million, and it's no surprise, therefore, that it didn't have a sequel. But in terms of its comic energy, I think it works well. It plays with stereotypes, but also derives from them genuine humour. And the thing I would like to close my first point on is that it laughs at itself. And I find that helps to make it a more genuine entertainment. Whereas I fear that Sleuth is all too serious about itself, that it lacks the true quality of comedy, which is that it's incapable of laughing at itself.
Mr. Schlender, any rebuttals?
Yes, a couple. So I would agree that Clue is a much more broad comedy. There's a lot of physicality, more slapstick. And Jeremy is not wrong that Sleuth has very serious elements in it. It has this ability to throttle up the humor, like when we see Michael Caine getting dressed up as a clown, and he's like, well, of course, like you would wear your size 26 shoes, you wouldn't wear your real shoes, you know? So there is a lot of humor there, but it does get serious because, as we learned, this was all a plot for Laurence Olivier's character to basically humiliate and try to kill Michael Caine's character, though again we have the spoiler warning and everything. Michael Caine's not actually dead in it, so it was just all kind of a weird, twisted, sick game to him. So I feel by having those serious elements that Clue doesn't have. Clue's only serious when like the murders happen, right? And they that's pretty abrupt shifts. You have the little telegram girl dancing and just gets shot and dies, so I think Sleuth is able to layer those elements better, and in a way, when you look at the performances from Caine and Olivier, that really stand out in a way that the Clue ensemble all together they kind of do, but not any one person is like the true standout or reacts well like as a team, like we see with Caine and Olivier.
Mr. Black, any rebuttals, or if you'd like to proceed with your next exhibit?
Well, I'm not so much thinking of rebuttals. I'm just not sure that I quite agree with that. I mean, I think there is a different type of ensemble play in both of them. I mean, obviously, the two-hander, which is what essentially Sleuth is, involves an interaction. But there is also interaction in Clue. And as my second point, I would say it's a film that works at a number of different levels. It works in part as slapstick. I myself am not a slapstick aficionado, but it works slapstick. And in fact, some of the manic energy goes back to silent comedy. I think there is a sort of energy there that you might associate with a Buster Keaton film. And so there's that element. Then there is the ironic looking at itself, the French maid that is overly a French maid and so on, the sassy broad who is overly a sassy broad. There's an interplay, there's a lot making fun of itself. Then there is, I think, some often quite witty dialogue, all that stuff about the FBI, culminating in the last lines given to the FBI agent. I think those are extraordinarily funny. And I therefore think that it works in part by appealing to different comic audiences. And simply as a detective story, which is one of my interests, the three possible endings, which of course offended some of the critics when it came out, are indeed a device that is used in a certain number of detective stories. And in practical terms, all detective stories rest on different possible endings because you, as it were, reach the correct one by dealing with what might appear to be misleading or false or falsified clues on the way. So I would actually say that it is funny, but it is also very sophisticated.
Mr. Schlender, poke some holes in this argument.
Well, I don't want to so much attack Clue's sophistication as much as I would like to point out that Sleuth sophistication is superior. And I think the reason is, I have to disagree with Jeremy when he says Sleuth can't really laugh at itself. I think it is making an interesting commentary on these kinds of detective fiction novels like that Laurence Olivier's character was writing. You know, he talks about like how it's for the noble mind, the gentry, things of that nature. And what is very interesting is that you actually have Laurence Olivier saying this to Michael Caine, because Guy Hamilton, director we've talked about tons of times on this show, he actually, in an interview, pointed to Michael Caine in the 60s as being an example of kind of like this British sophistication leaving that Oxford pronunciations aside that Laurence Olivier really represents. So I think you actually get a level of commentary, not only about detective fiction, but England at large. You know, it's a dangerous point to bring up with Jeremy Black in the courtroom, but I think I know my English history enough for it to land.
Well, I think you're right that they're going for that dichotomy. You have Laurence Olivier as the older man representing a past, representing a formulaic and mannered form of writing, it apparently being sexually inadequate, certainly as far as his wife is concerned. And Michael Caine, in contrast, is younger. He is, in every sense of the word, a thrusting young man, and as a result of that, he represents a different form. I mean, yes, I agree with you. It is rather simplistic at the same time. There's no, as it were, nuance or ambiguity there, is there really? I mean, this is about how the old kill the young. And which is, you know, a traditional plot, goes back right the way to antiquity and relationships between the gods. So, you know, I'm not saying that Sleuth is a bad film. It clearly isn't. What I'm saying is I'm not sure that its comic character is as clear. And I would say it was primarily a rather brilliant vehicle for Laurence Olivier, that it's a brilliant film version of an established play, and kept tightly so because of the Schaefer brothers being the key players, as it were, in the screenplay. It has one or two, I think, very interesting filmic qualities. I think the sets at the beginning, the outset, is very good, and actually I happen to think the very beginning is better than the equivalent in Clue. And I also thought the rather zany set was interesting, but that in a sense is part of the problem. It is a single set in a sense. I know we go into the garden, but it's in practice a single set, rather as if you were in the theatre. And the whole the whole film of Sleuth, in my mind, recalls a play, and it's no accident that it's a great theatrical knight, you know, who's the key role, and who, in a sense, steals the scenes from Michael Caine. Michael Caine is good, but he's outplayed, and of course, Laurence Olivier would have loved that. You know, the same dichotomy you see in Marathon Man with Dustin Hoffman. Now, I think in the case of Clue, it's not, you might argue, as profound about human weakness, or it's not as mannered in its presentation of a social dichotomy. I mean, it doesn't have the servants taking on the masters or something like that. It's not a neo-Marxist or generational read. And, you know, you might argue it's trivial. But once you're prepared to see comedy as not necessarily having to stage or indeed detective fiction as not necessarily having to stage a particular political or social narrative, then I find it a more powerful work, and a work that constantly surprises. Now, just as you might be starting to feel, well, we're a bit bored with this, suddenly you get amazing new developments. Now, the theme here is amazing. Whether they're plausible or not isn't the point. And if you want to look at a film, which in my mind, Clue almost riffs from, and it's Blazing Saddles. Nobody says Blazing Saddles is a poor comedy because it's not plausible, or because it has too much energy. And I think there is obviously in very different settings, both historicized very differently, there is a link between Blazing Saddles and Clue, which, as far as I'm aware, none of the critics have pulled out, but which I think is quite an interesting one.
You heard it here first, people. So when that gets ripped off. No, I think what's interesting about Clue and the energy that you mentioned is that it's based on a game, right? And it really feels like everyone in there is playing the game, even if they don't quite understand the rules. Yeah, I believe you call it Cluedo over there, Jeremy. Yeah, and so it does a good job of referencing back to that board game. So does Battleship that came out a couple of years ago. So we want to be a little careful, I think. So yes, it's got crazy madcap energy. It's a little all over the place. It follows the game really well. But at the end of the day, that's kind of all it is. And then it's over. You have the three endings, which is a little interesting because is it Mrs. White or Mrs. Scarlet screaming during one of the murders she's supposed to have committed if she actually did it? And so like you get it does get a little confusing. Whereas Sleuth, I think it does such a good job of ramping up for that first act, pulling back a bit, ramping up again, pulling back a bit. It paces itself very well with its story beats, whereas Clue just kind of takes off like a shot. So it's two different modes, like the jury will have to decide which one they appreciate more. But when you talk about that filmic quality, film qua film, I like the pacing that Sleuth offers better. And a lot of that does have to do with the fact that it's based off the stage play, like you mentioned, which I would say is a strength, not a demerit, even though I know some judges here find theater to be boring.
Yes, apropos of the Cluedo thing, there's also Wadsworth, of course, who's the principal character in Clue. Wadsworth is produced the English version of Cluedo. I can understand where you're coming from, and it may well be that I was wrong to suggest we compare the two, and that we should really have compared the two different versions of Sleuth. Because
it's too late.
I know, but it's for listeners. I'm trying to give ideas for listeners. We are serving a broader audience here. But I mean, what I would put in I've always liked that kind of, an American habit. I mean, I can remember when younger watching It's a Mad, Mad World, for example. The American habit of producing these kind of, in some respects, zany films. Sometimes they're a sort of a takeoff of the journey kind of theme. They're going on at the present moment. I mean, recently, of course, Clooney did that one about sandals and whatnot. I can't remember what the title of it was on, the one in California where it starts off on the Roman Empire and he's playing an actor in a Roman
Hail Caesar.
Hail Caesar. I mean, I so happen to think this is a very good tradition. Now, what is unusual about Clue, and if I wanted to criticize Clue, I would say that whereas most of these are, if you like, open sky films, I mean, in a sense, they're set in American landscape, there's a lot of outside filming, a lot of the energy comes from physically moving from X to Y, cut them off at the pass in Blazing Saddles, as the stereotype. Clue is different because, and you're absolutely correct, Dylan's absolutely correct, it draws on the game in being set in a very restricted location. Now, Sleuth does as well, but I'm not talking here at the moment about the strengths or weaknesses of Sleuth. Let's just look at the strengths and weaknesses of Clue. If you find that almost, as indeed with the weather being so bleak and at nighttime, almost closed in too much, then it's not a welcome film. It's not a film where the light comes in, as it were. But on the other hand, is an attempt to throw back to the mid-50s. It's set in 1954. We begin, of course, there's the McCarthy hearings on the McCarthy hearings on, you know, the Un-American Committee on the television. J. Edgar Hoover is a character off stage. Everybody's smoking for America. You have a butler with a wing collar. I mean, the house itself is a kind of Addams Family style house moved into a remote country location. So in a way, it is an interesting piece of Americana using what is a standard American theme in zany manic comedy, but putting it in a different setting. Now, for some people, that will work, and they will think, that's interesting, you know, and other people will think, no, I don't like that setting, and I don't find the characters convincing. Well, as far as the latter are concerned, I ask them, which comedy film do they find the characters convincing? You know, would they like to say whether Dr. Strangelove, the characters are convincing? I mean, you know, I'm not sure that's the point of a comedy. What I think it does riff off is the idea of let's use, but also make fun of the idea of Clue, because Clue, of course, ends with one solution, whereas, you know, the game, whereas the film is being much more, it's playing with you and the genre as much as developing a storyline. And I think that's funny. And of course, the very last line is one in which it's asking you almost to, well, in fact, very clearly to mock the entire thing. And I think that's quite brilliant.
Yeah, the multiple outs for Clue is something that's really unique. Also, I'd be remiss not to point this out. So we do see the McCarthy hearings going on, but just for everyone who was watching the movie, HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, was in the House. Senator McCarthy was in the Senate. So he was never on HUAC. Richard Nixon served on it briefly when he was in the House, but that's neither here nor there. Just wanted to clear that up. And also that McCarthy hearing. Yeah, that McCarthy hearing is the one where he was basically shot down by the army guy. Said, you know, have you no sense of decency? And so that was basically the last you hear from McCarthy. I did appreciate them always saying, well, the communism was a red herring. You know? So Clue does have value there. It's more set dressing. I don't think it's so much a commentary on it. And so I'd leave my rejoinder at that, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Black, any further exhibits?
No, I thought I rather liked the music. I thought the character, the protagonist who played Wadsworth, did it well.
Tim Curry.
Yes, with his rather mad eyes. I thought that some of the ensemble actors were better and actresses better than others. I preferred Miss Scarlett, who I thought was absolutely tremendous. And for me, she was she carried a lot of it. Every scene she was in, I thought she had wonderful lines, wonderful movements. But some of the others were brilliant as well. And the extent to which people like, you know, Colonel Mustard turned out to be different to how you assumed, and everybody had a dark secret. I thought that was lovely. I thought that was really very, very amusing.
Mr. Schlender, you may proceed with your first exhibit.
All right, well, thank you. So what I really want to hang my hat on for these two movies, it's going to have to be the strength of Michael Caine's and Laurence Olivier's performances. The ensemble in Clue is pretty great. I mean, we all like Yvette a lot. She was fantastic, right? Yeah, I see you, Maynard. But
I'm a Madeline Kahn man.
So what was interesting about Sleuth is it's just the two actors. That's what people really need to understand. It is just Michael Caine and Laurence Olivier working off of each other. And in Olivier's performance, he was nominated for an Oscar, and you can 100% see why. And as a matter of fact, Michael Caine was nominated for an Oscar for this very movie as well. And you can 100% see why, because he runs through every possible human emotion in almost like one scene. He gets crazy, he gets funny, he gets angry,
That's all the human emotions.
Well, that's all of them,
All
right?
3 of them.
It's all the ones we show on this show, that's for sure. So I think when you look at just his performance alone, being this wealthy writer living in his big mansion, kind of resenting the fact that he's growing old, and what's more, resenting that the youth is coming up, like Jeremy mentioned. This is a parable that goes back to the beginning of time. And the fact that it works so effortlessly in this setting with something that just seems kind of silly, like he writes mystery novels, but they're able to bring that much emotional depth and resonance to it, I just don't think it could be ignored. So that's going to be my first point, Your Honor, is I just want the jury to really focus on how brilliant Olivier and Kane are in Sleuth.
Mr. Black?
Well, I think they are brilliant. Yes, I don't deny that.
Here.
All right. And then, so I would, the last point I would make, just because we've touched on so much of the other stuff I wanted to talk about, I want to really just kind of drill down a bit into the pacing. I mentioned it a bit earlier, and I think it is something that the jury's really going to have to consider. As Jeremy pointed out, Sleuth is based off of a play, and it really does kind of have that play feel quality to it. Not in a bad way, though. I mean, it's a pretty chunky runtime, but like I said, it's paced well enough where you're able to be along for those emotional rides. So when it gets really funny, you're laughing, and when it gets serious, you get serious, then the movie shifts and you kind of ramp up again. Whereas Clue, people show up, Mr. Body shows up, and everything just gets bigger. You don't really have time to catch your breath until they do those 3 different endings. And then when they do the 3 endings, you kind of wonder, well, how am I supposed to feel? Which one is the quote unquote real one? Because when the movie came out in theaters, every theater had a different ending. They called it the A, B, and C. So the first one being with, was it Mrs. Peacock was the murderer? Mm-hmm. And then all the way down to Wadsworth pointing out how they're all guilty. That's a fun one, whether they're all guilty. That's probably the one that works best if you could only pick one. But by doing that, while it's interesting, it does pull you out of the movie immediately. So like the movie's basically over as soon as they go, but this could have happened. And now it kind of feels like you're just watching a little extra. So it's interesting, but it doesn't pull you along emotionally the way Sleuth does. And I will rest there, Your Honor.
Any rebuttals, Mr. Black, before we close out?
Well, Judge, not so much a rebuttal, more a reflection. That's a very interesting comment we've just heard. And one of the things that makes me think about is I go quite often to, I live in the provinces, and I go quite often to the cinema, not just to see films, but also to see filmed versions of plays, live productions of plays, which are regularly shown. And indeed, also, I see opera and sometimes ballet that way. It strikes me that the film Sleuth would almost have been better simply as a filmed version of the play. And I'm not sure what we gain by having it as a film as opposed to as a filmed version.
Michael Caine in a clown costume. That's what we
get.
No,
but seriously, I'm not really sure what we gain from it as a film. Now, if we go to Clue, you could argue that Clue is constrained in part, potentially, by the conventions both of the detective novel and by the rules of the game Clue, or in England, Cluedo. But you could then turn round and say, yes, but it consistently and repeatedly breaks the conventions, and that's what makes it a good film. That far from it being a film of a game of Clue, as it were, with human characters, or a film of a detective novel with potential different answers, which is always the case with detective novels. Every detective novel has at least 3 potential answers. Instead of being that, it actually, as it were, smashes through with its energy to break the bounds of the conventions. And I think that's quite an interesting use of film. And I so happen to think it makes a good film. But whether you think it makes a good film or not, I think it's an interesting use of film and of cinema to break the conventions of established genres and rules.
All sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Mr. Black, you may begin.
I would argue that Clue is a particularly good example of the best quality American zany comedy. Like Blazing Saddles, it actually takes the existing boundaries and pushes them on. I would argue that it does so very well. I think it benefits enormously from a sharp screenplay, from genuine wit, from laughing with the characters, but more particularly at and through them, and for making, as a result, some quite interesting points about the nature of reality and people's willingness to believe in integrity with people who are obviously lacking integrity, but taking these serious points and making them consistently and repeatedly funny in a way that makes it a comedy. I would argue that, in contrast, Sleuth, in many senses, is more a tragedy, and that Laurence ending in a murder, and Laurence Olivier is playing a brilliant, tragic role. He does it well, but you might as well have seen him on the stage for that, or as a filmed version of the stage version.
Thank you. Mr. Schlender, please present your closing argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. I really do appreciate what Jeremy has to say about Clue. And when we look at Clue versus Sleuth, I think sometimes it pays to stay inside the box. Sleuth follows a lot more of the conventions and the norms that Clue was so fond of breaking. But by doing so, they were able to get incredibly elevated performances. We were able to get a depth of field to the story that was way more than a man just trying to get revenge for having been the victim of adultery. So when you go into that jury room, just remember how strong Laurence Olivier and Michael Caine are in that movie, how tight and well constructed every piece of that puzzle was. We got to see a true masterclass in comedy, drama, a little bit of mystery thrown in as well. And Clue, while a very funny movie, just does not measure up to the, I would dare say, epicness that Sleuth was able to attain. So thank you.
Thank you all. Members of the jury, Mr. Maynard Bangs, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, and Mr., to make a long story short,
Too late.
You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine which film is the superior movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
I never understood why they never had the pillow as a weapon in Clue. That's what my mother tried to use.
And she only managed to get it to work with your hair.
Oh.
All right, everyone. What are we thinking, Big Ben?
Well, this is going to be hard for me because I'm going to have to put a lot of bias aside. I do not like Clue. I do not understand why people like it so much. When we're comparing this as like sort of a stage play, Clue is the one that feels like a stage play to me. Like every comic device that they use feels like this sort of thing I would see on a stage where everyone's like talking in unison and that sort of thing. Like it doesn't feel like things that these characters would actually do, and particularly Tim Curry. I don't understand why people like him too much. Everything he does is a performance. It never feels like an actual person. It always feels like some sort of facade. I'm sure he's a wonderful person, but I never
he's
understood
not
it.
But no, he
yeah,
is.
I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, I was thinking of sort of the comparisons of these two, and they both could be stage plays, because while Clue does use a lot of slapstick, and there's some slapstick in Sleuth too, they're both heavily dialogue driven for their wit and comedy. There's a lot of setups and punchlines in Clue, beyond just the slapstick and beyond the zaniness.
Telegraphed. Like every joke in Clue is telegraphed as a play.
I mean, yeah, but that's kind of comedy. Like you know something's going to be set up and punched down and give a punchline. But yeah, they're both kind of claustrophobic and they keep you in not really one room but one house, right? And I think Clue is a little bit more of a riff on the Dark House movies of the like 40s more than a detective, really, because everyone involved is a potential victim or what's the people who aren't victims, Ryan? The other one,
Perpetrators.
Perpetrator. That's the one. The killer doers. I was gonna say
The killer doers.
Killer doers is good. So no one's really the detective that sticks out of it. Ryan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I really like Clue, but I do have to bristle at this idea that Sleuth is not a comedy. I think that it is indeed a comedy. It's a dark comedy,
Right.
but it is a comedy of manners. It's about approaching this idea of the cuckold and the cuckolder and finding ways to wring humor out of that, but also wring pathos out of it. And what I really appreciate about Sleuth is that unlike Clue, which kind of feels, I mean, I like Clue better as a movie, but the setting of it does feel kind of monotonous. It's kind of the same hallway, the same rooms. It kind of, it gets on me after a while. But what I appreciate about Sleuth is that it's challenging to master the sense of space in adapting something from the stage. Yeah. Because from a stage, you're looking at it from one angle. And so actors can go from one side of the stage to the other, but really you don't really get a sense of the environment. You get a sense of the proscenium arch, but you don't get a sense of the environment. And with Sleuth, I really got a sense that although I could tell that it was a stage play, it felt opened up in a way that I found very appealing.
And how about the performance of you? We obviously have the ensemble cast who,
outstanding. One of the most outstanding ensemble casts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Madeline Kahn wasn't really brought up. I care for Mrs. White a lot more than I like Miss Scarlet.
Oh my God, Miss Scarlet is that childhood crush I've never gotten over.
How many of those do you have, Ryan?
Oh, I have lots of them. I got lots of them.
But then you've got the two-hander of Sleuth, right? Where this is just Sir Laurence Olivier and Michael Caine, and it wasn't brought up, but these two have another kind of similarity where there are phony names of actors credited in the beginning of Sleuth for actors who are not real, and they are supposed to be like the detective that Michael Caine is disguised as a detective.
Oh, that is so clever.
So there are about 4 or 5 cast member names at the beginning of Sleuth to lead you off the trail of the twist, similar to Clue, who tries to lead you off the trail at the end with its multiple endings. And
quick question though on Sleuth, did you guys know that Michael Caine was playing that detective? Because I knew it right away.
It took me about 20 seconds because he's kind of in the dark at first, and then he comes out of the dark, and I go, why is that Michael
the way
Caine?
He says, like, sir, that's Michael Caine. Like it's no one else.
But he has a great performance. I'll disagree with Jeremy on this. I don't think Sir Laurence Olivier is acting circles around Michael Caine. I think Michael Caine hangs with him the entire time, and he does more of the comedy because half the time he's in makeup and doing the detective thing. But I think it hangs and is having tons of fun with it.
Yeah, Olivier is having the time of his life in this film. You can tell that he's attacking this material like a hungry dog. Yeah. Like he really, really, really wanted to do this. And you can sense the palpable enjoyment that's kind of just vibrating off of him.
And when I watched this with Schlenzo too, halfway through, we go, man, they should remake this movie and cast Michael Caine as Sir Laurence Olivier's part.
That's
we looked it up, and Kenneth Branagh did it in 2007.
He already did it
with Jude Law as the younger guy, and I'm like, damn it, Kenneth Branagh is almost as smart as me. He's just older.
He just did it first.
Exactly, he did it first. And the other thing is what surprised me is that Clue did so poorly in the theaters. I was wondering why that was, and it didn't really strike me. It's because it splits up all 3 of its endings. I mean, this movie has a cult following, I'd say probably from being replayed on Comedy Central so much, Ryan, where you get all 3 endings. And to me, with all 3 endings, it doesn't kill the pacing to me the way Dylan thought. I love the 3 endings. You have to have the 3 endings.
I disagree with you. I was scared to death I was going to see 6 of them, like for every character.
If we were in the world of DVDs back then, there would be 6 endings.
Yeah, like a VCR video game. Like that's what I thought that would have been fun.
And the DVD would let you like would randomly give you one of the 6 every time you
that
watch
would
it.
be
That's what the
awesome.
Blu-ray does. The Blu-ray gives you
Brilliant.
a random ending unless you select it
But
to
I
get
would
all 3 endings.
I'd feel cheapened if I watched the whole movie and it's just Miss Scarlet. I'd feel cheapened. Like I want all 3 endings. I want them. I want more. I want one where Michael McKean did it. Actually, he should be the only one who didn't do it. I told you
he
I
has
didn't
the great final line. I'm gonna go home and have sex with my wife.
Should have been your nickname this weekend, but I got charged and shot down. So let's start locking in some decisions. Ben, some final thoughts, and then what are you gonna go with?
Yeah, it's really hard for me to put my bias aside, but I think everything that the two do, Sleuth does its intentionality better. I really hate the gag where Tim Curry's running around the house for a full 20 minutes. I was bored of that gag by
That's
minute
the best
2.
part. What are you talking
I
about?
hated it.
That's the best part.
It
We
went
gotta
on
sign
for
you up
long.
to the fun police, Ben. You are a natural.
The comedy, like it feels forced. I would say like Ghostbusters, Jeremy Black asks like which comedy like feels more natural. Like when things are happening to them, it feels more funny to me as a comedy than when they're like doing this sort of stage acting comedy where everything's telegraphed way in advance. And the performances on Sleuth, the performances and the structure of Sleuth, where it continually layers what's going on with intentionality, whereas Clue just sort of pulls it out of nowhere, is done better. I'm going for Sleuth.
Right guy?
Clue is a gentleman's 7. Sleuth is a gentleman's 6. But that said, I really enjoyed what Dylan had to say. Not an easy task going up against Clue. It's kind of a beloved film. I mean, it's a cult audience, but it's beloved within that audience. So I'm going to have to go to which case I find was superior, and I'm going to have to go Sleuth.
Wow. Oh boy, we're gonna get so many angry emails.
Bring it on, baby.
So
Hey,
it
we didn't
doesn't
get any
matter.
for Galaxy Quest, so
It doesn't matter. Well, no, I mean that was obvious. Galaxy Quest destroyed Wrath of Khan.
How dare you?
I am close. I did really like Sleuth. The performances obviously are really good, and the dialogue's great. Clue is it's kind of been one of my favorites. It's probably my second favorite comedy of all time. I adore Clue. I can probably quote it line for line.
But don't.
With these two back to back, I found myself kind of enjoying Sleuth more because I'd never seen it. And
Sure.
and I'd seen Clue a million times. So but in more fairness, like what I'm ever gonna watch again, I'll watch Clue in 6 months and again in a year. I'll watch Clue over and over, no matter whether Ben likes it or not. So I'm gonna go for Clue, but it's 2 versus 1. So we should get out there and tell that very handsome judge. Now that's how it could have happened. Or
Clue is the best.
everyone give an entire different verdict now.
No.
Well, this is where you shoot me.
This is what could have happened. Clue wins.
The
All right.
professor.
Let's get out there and tell that handsome jerk.
Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict, you asshole?
We have, Your Honor, in the case of Clue versus Sleuth, 1972, we find in favor of Sleuth, 1972.
The verdict is still rendered.
I'm very surprised.
Sleuth is hereby recognized as the superior film, and Clue is sentenced to a remake wherein each character will actually be color coordinated. Court is adjourned.
Agreed. Yes.
I like
Very
that.
fair. Very fair. This is Mr. Marigold. I was in line to be the yellow piece before that jerk Colonel Mustard showed up. Mr. Schlender, you surprisingly won this case. What did you think of that verdict?
I gotta say I am surprised. So Jeremy put Sleuth on our radar. I wasn't even aware of this, and I did enjoy it a lot. But man, I think Clue is just really funny. I watched it again this morning while I was taking case notes. I'm like, this is great zany comedy. So I'm just glad that I was able to make good arguments and have a good conversation with our good friend Jeremy. I mean, I just love having Jeremy on the show to talk about this stuff. He always brings Michael Caine movies to our attention, so I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And here comes Mr. Jeremy Black. What did you think of that verdict, sir?
I think it was an interesting verdict. What I would urge listeners to do is to go and see both films and to make your own mind up. They're both good films. I personally enjoy comedy, and I enjoy the American comic tradition. And I actually think this is one of the comparisons in which the English version, or British version, if you wish to use that term, whilst fine acting and cleverly written, doesn't seem to me to add much to the play. Whereas I actually think Clue stands as a really impressive way to enjoy yourself and relax. I've seen it now, I think 3 times definitely, maybe 4. And I find it fresh each time I watch it. And the dialogue.
So what do you, the viewers at home, think?
Yes.
Let's chew on that while we return to studio for post-trial analysis. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Is it just me
Well,
or Mr. Marigold
just 'cause we're
sound
in
a
studio.
lot like the bailiff?
I don't know.
They're related. His name is Bailiff Marigold.
Well, Jeremy,
yeah,
great
so-
case. Thank you for bringing the movie to our attention, and everyone should definitely watch both.
Jeremy,
Yeah,
do
no,
you think
they're-
they should make a stage version of Clue?
No, there is one. I've seen it.
Yes, I think it would be, I don't know, I think it's something that works better as a film, doesn't it? Because you need to have, but you could, I mean, as with all of these things, there are, you've got a stage version in some films. I don't think they necessarily always work well, whereas film versions of plays, I don't think work well. I myself believe that you ought, if you want to see a play at the cinema, you should see a filmed play.
Brilliant idea. 6 different versions of the play, and every night you go, the audience gets little slips of paper to vote.
That's
they
happened.
think-
I've seen it. Yeah, no, you
Well,
like
it's
pick the
my
cards and it's
idea.
a different
Kenneth
ending.
Branagh stole it
Kenneth
again.
Branagh, no, he wrote the play. Yeah.
All right, so Jeremy,
Kenneth
which
Branagh.
board game should they turn into a movie next?
Hungry, hungry
God,
Hippos.
I don't know. What do you think?
Hungry
Uno.
Hungry Hippos. Hungry Hungry
Twister.
Hippos.
Twister.
They did Twister, remember? Hungry Hungry Hippos, I think, absolutely would be. Or
Settlers
Jenga.
of Catan.
Don't Wake Daddy. Yeah, that's it. Don't Wake Daddy.
That was another horror movie. Jenga would be great, and The Rock is climbing the thing the whole time.
Oh my god, I love it.
So Jeremy, what have you been up to? You written any books this week? I know you've got your arm in a sling, but I'm sure.
Yeah,
it
I've
hasn't
got my
stopped
arm
you.
in a sling, so that's why I'm a bit low. I fell on concrete, which wasn't much fun. And at least I remembered to take a book to the to the hospital, because it's the lines that time forgot at British Hospital at the moment. What have I done? What have I seen? Well, I'm just trying to think, because I have seen some films, but I'm just trying to think. I mean, I'm not allowed to say this, am I? I fell asleep when I watched Sleuth for the last time.
Oh,
really?
But, well,
But you've seen it before.
I've seen it twice before, and I'd actually seen Olivier on stage. I saw him as Shylock in Merchant of Venice, and he was a great actor. I'm not, and this worked, but actually look, I've got to be careful here. I think everybody should watch Sleuth, but I myself actually found it more relaxing to watch Clue. I find it more relaxing to watch Clue than play bloody Cluedo, which quite frankly is incredibly Dullsville. Whereas Clue manages to jump that in a most exciting fashion. What have I been doing? I've been doing a bit of writing. I've been feeling sorry for myself, having hurt my arm. I've been reading one-handed detective novels. I've been trying to learn.
You have to. Your other arm's in a sling, right?
Yeah, having to learn all the things you can't do well with one hand. So doing up your trousers is not easy with just one hand. And the result is, when you go out for lunch, you've got to really be careful. You don't want to get yourself arrested. And in fact, there was a hilarious moment. I went out for lunch on Friday, go to this pub, have a perfectly pleasant lunch. It was a good lunch. And at the end, I couldn't find my keys. And I thought to myself, well, they're in my pockets, but I can't get my arm into my pocket, my left pocket. who can I ask? And I realized in this day and age, you do not ask a waitress whether you've got a key in your pocket. So at least I've learned something in my old age.
Fanny pack. Get a fanny pack, Jeremy, and you can. It's a pocket right in front of you. You can just
but I'd only lose that. You see, I'm not as
got it. So we always ask for a recommendation from you and our guests for movies that you think people should see. So, what is a recommendation do you think for a movie people should see?
Well, I saw for the second time, I'd already seen it once before, Glass Onion, and I think it's better. The first time I found some of the characters a bit irritating. The second time I was blown away. I thought, no, this is a really good film. So I would recommend Glass Onion and particularly if you find it a bit irritating on the first time, watch it a second time.
It didn't blow me away the first time, so I am looking forward to seeing it a second time. I know you want to talk about it on the show. We were thinking about putting it head to head with The Last of Sheila.
Oh, I don't know that film. Yeah.
Oh, well, then it would be a good learning experience for you. It's apparently a film that inspired both Knives Out and Glass Onion. It was brought to our attention by the very talented Ryan Luis Rodriguez. Schlenzo, what's your recommendation?
All right. So really what I enjoyed the most about Sleuth was that it was, a two-hander. So I'm recommending a movie. It's not technically a two-hander because there's more people in it, but it really does focus on the two main characters. I know, but it's about the two main characters, and I'm recommending Fall, which came out in 2022. And basically, it's these two girls who are thrill seekers. They climb to the top of this like abandoned TV radio tower kind of thing, and they get stuck up there. And what's interesting about the movie is it really is about the drama of them being stuck up there, that thriller element. Are they going to survive? And it also covers a lot of emotional issues as well, dealings of like grief, trust, betrayal, and it's just from like the two lead actresses that just really carry that movie while they're stuck up there. So it really packs a punch. It's a very good movie, and that's what I'm recommending.
Yeah, if you've got not vertigo, Ryan, what's the fear of
acrophobia?
Acrophobia, there it is.
Which I have.
I was going to call it the Faller doings, but if you've got that and you don't really like heights, then you may not be a movie for you. But I showed it to Schlenzo. We watched it this year, and I enjoyed it. We haven't heard a ton about it. But it's a fun like survival horror. I'd call it a horror because nobody likes heights. You're supposed to be afraid.
Well, it's a thriller. It's not a horror. It's a thriller element.
Yeah, I don't know.
Survival horror is a video game genre.
No, that's it. Doesn't need to have zombies to be a horror. Rye Guy, you were the judge. What is your recommendation?
Well, this week's trial. Oh, hold on. I'm gonna get there. This week's trial concerns mysteries revolving around crime. Accordingly, my recommendation concerns crime, a recent release called The Pez Outlaw. It is a documentary about a Midwestern man who begins trafficking rare and commercially unreleased Pez dispensers from the former Soviet Union, which attracts the attention of the law and brings him from rags to riches and back again.
What's a Pez?
It is
The Pez is the little,
candy.
the
little candy,
the little plastic heads, and they open and the little tablets come out their neck.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is a delightfully brief little morsel that eschews the traditional talking head format and instead presents something cinematic and engaging without losing the inherent necessities of the genre, courtesy of some canny reenactments that reminded me a bit of The Thin Blue Line. The Pez Outlaw is currently streaming on Netflix.
I see what you did there with the heads. That was clever.
Yeah,
that was completely unplanned. Did not mean for that to happen, but it
was great.
Yeah, they probably have another name over there by you, Jeremy. Maybe they're, I don't know, Pez dudes.
I know, I'm so useless I wouldn't know.
But they're those little chalky flavorless
I'm just getting used to being in the 20th century, and somebody tells me we're in the 21st.
Yeah.
Maynard, what are you recommending?
Oh, I got to go before Ben. Well, screw Ben then, huh?
Best for last.
So my recommendation this week also features Michael Caine trying to get one over on another well-matched scallywag, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels from 1988.
Love that movie.
Directed by Frank Oz and starring Steve Martin opposite Caine. It tells the story of two con men who compete over who can swindle a beautiful young heiress out of $50,000 first. The two fraudsters are neck and neck throughout as they continuously undermine and sabotage each other to maintain the advantage, and the results are, of course, hilarious. The combination of the Academy Award-winning Michael Caine with the Primetime Emmy Award-winning Steve Martin is masterful casting. Caine as the sophisticated cavalier and Martin as the shameless vagabond complement each other wonderfully. And be on the lookout for Ian McDiarmid, aka the Emperor in Star Wars, who plays a delightful butler. Dirty Rotten Scoundrels is currently streaming on Pluto TV and Tubi.
I love Tubi.
Tubi. Big Ben, what is your recommendation?
My recommendation this week isn't all that connected to today's features, other than there's a bit of mystery involved, but it's more of a thriller revenge flick. But nevertheless, I'm going with 2003's Old Boy, a film that answers the question, what if Quentin Tarantino was born in South Korea? It's very stylistic. It's out there. It's dark. Old Boy is an experience like no other, no matter how many other films try to copy it. The hallway fight in Daredevil, for example, was practically directly lifted from this film. The plot centers around a man who was locked up in prison for 15 years, a time frame necessary for some unknown person in his past to maneuver all the pieces and exact revenge on this person. There are no heroes in Old Boy. There are only victims. And the last 20 minutes of the film, assuming they haven't been spoiled for you, will stick with you for days on end. Old Boy is not currently streaming anywhere, which is as strong as an argument as I can think of for preserving physical media, as the legal eagles on these platforms can never take it away from you. So head on out there and see if you can procure it on disc.
Did you see the remake?
Yeah, it's okay. It's not as good as the original.
And then Joaquin Phoenix is another movie where he beats the crap.
You were
out of
never
people with
really
a hammer.
here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that one's okay. That one's
I
better.
like
Good
that
movie.
one.
Good movie. I like it.
Jeremy, did you see Dirty Rotten Scoundrels?
Years ago. Yes, I agree. I think it's a very good film. I think it's wonderful when you get this counterpointing of the British and the American actors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's Steve Martin and
Martin
Caine
just kills it. It's so good.
Oh yeah, no, it's and yeah, just it just kind of mirrors to each other. It's really
well.
funny.
In fact, it's in some ways a spoof on the 1950s, the standard 1950s films about heiresses and what happens to them. But it's a rather amusing modern spoof on those.
Yeah, no, we watched it this morning. It's a very good time. Really enjoy it. Did you see Old Boy? Guy hits people with hammers.
I'm not here, Old Boy.
That's a very violent one.
That one's heavy. That's a heavy one.
You might like that one. But with that, we are all out of show, but we want to thank our guest, Jeremy Black, for joining us. Thank you, as always, Jeremy.
Thank you very much.
And we're going to have you back. Glass Onion versus The Last of Sheila. That's up next on the docket. We will after this. Here, we don't want people to peep behind the curtain.
Okay.
Cheese is made.
All that it takes to make this. So we hope everyone will join us then as well as the reels of justice keep turning.
Count it.
Scarlet.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.